This week, we'll begin looking at the book of Proverbs as a church, and we'll keep picking up on it as during Pastor Mike's weeks off. And this is a little different because we won't be going through this book verse by verse as we usually like to do when we go through a book. The book of Proverbs is repetitious, and it cycles through, sometimes repeating itself word for word at different times. When we're young and our parents might give us the same instruction over and over and over, we sometimes might have yelled at them, "I know, I get it." And wisdom does the same, for wisdom is good and looks after your best interests. But if we were to go looking through this verse by verse, it would leave us all as children saying, "I get it, I get it." So we'll be looking at this book kind of section by section, enjoying what it has to offer us. Today we'll go over an introduction of the book and its primary author, and cover chapter 1. But before we get going any further, I'd like to ask a few questions. Who are some of the wisest people you know? Why do you think Solomon asked for wisdom instead of wealth or power? How can you pass on wisdom to your children, grandchildren, or other people in your life? Proverbs was likely compiled during the beginning of the reign of King Solomon, who is attributed with saying about 80% of the Proverbs in this book during the 900s BC. And we know the work, as we hold it in our Bibles, wasn't finished until at least the 600s or 700s BC, because chapter 25 says that the men of King Hezekiah copied these writings. Some people think that this book was finished being compiled more towards the 300s. And this means that while Solomon was the main orator of much of this book, different collectors and scribes had their hands on it at different points. And I've split this book into 9 sections as of today, but as we dive deeper, I might change my mind how we'll go over it. But here are the 9 sections that we'll be working with as of now. We got number 1, the title and introduction. Then we got the woman of wisdom and the woman of folly, Solomon's wisdom, and then we get the words of the wise. Then we get, next after that, more words of the wise. It says that in the text, so we're going to separate them there. Number 6, Solomon's wisdom collected under King Hezekiah. Number 7, sayings of the collector, son of the blameless, to God is with you and the devoured. An interesting one, and we'll get there when we get there. King Lemuel's wisdom, and finally, what everyone probably knows and has read before, the excellent wife. And the last few sections have interesting titles, and I'm going to keep us in suspense for probably about a year as it takes to cover this. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1 tells us exactly who is talking. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. We're going to talk about Solomon for a little bit. What's so special about him? That he received wisdom from God. Solomon was a king, and he wasn't a king by birthright, but by the father's choice. And he wasn't the first or the second or even the third born of his father. He was likely one of the youngest born to David, to the wife that David probably owed the most. Solomon loved the Lord in his youth and walked in the statutes of his father. He offered 1,000 burnt offerings to the Lord at a high place because he loved God. One night, Yahweh appeared to him in a dream, telling him to ask, and he shall receive. Solomon acknowledges that he is a servant, and he's a child, ill-equipped to lead a great multitude of God's chosen people. Solomon asks the Lord for an understanding mind to discern good from evil in order to judge God's people. Yahweh was pleased with Solomon's request. God told him that because he asked a good thing, God would give him wisdom and discernment greater than anyone before or after him. And not only that, God blessed him with what he didn't ask for, riches and honor that no king on earth would have in those days. Solomon demonstrated this wisdom in judging disputes between the people. The people of Israel and Judah lived merrily under King Solomon, eating and drinking, living in safety and peace, each man under his own vine and fig tree. And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding abundant. His wisdom surpassed those of every foreign nation, and he was wiser than all the wise men, and his fame grew. The kings and commoners from every tribe and nation came to learn from Solomon's wisdom. And what's incredible is that I believe that we have the cream of the crop as far as Proverbs go right here. Solomon spoke about 3,000 Proverbs, it says. We have about 500 right here. And he sang about 1,005 songs, and we have 2 in the Psalms for us to enjoy, and we have a whole book called the Song of Solomon. I'd venture to guess that most of Solomon's Proverbs were written during this time around when the temple was being built or completed, almost immediately after when he was given the gift of wisdom. Proverbs has little to no narrative in it, save for a loose thread of Lady Wisdom and her doings and character, and a lecture from father to son. There's a narrative on the outside of the book that we'll cover little by little as we come across it, following the life of Solomon. And as we follow Solomon's life, we can savor every word in the book of Proverbs as bittersweet truth that anybody can hear these words, but not everyone will heed them. So let's open up our Bibles to Proverbs chapter 1, and we're going to begin looking at the introduction of this book. Starting with chapter 1, verse 1, Proverbs 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. So right off the bat, we're told who wrote this book. And I like how letters back then and books back then started with who wrote them. They don't have to look for a signature on the bottom. Plain and simple, and you know exactly who it's from. And in a few verses, we'll find out who he's addressing. And these sayings are compiled right here, that we might know wisdom and instruction and understand insight. That we might understand instruction in wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity. We are to be fair and impartial, using God's word to judge matters. And these sayings are to give caution to the simple and knowledge to the youthful. Proverbs are not promises from God, such as, in the Torah we get, you shall do this and I shall do this. The wisdom on Proverbs is more so, if you do this, it is very likely to go this way. For not all the wise live long lives, and not all the fools are immediately put to shame. Some of the wisdom is only observed by others after we're in the grave. Proverbs are best case, most of the time, guiding principles. And they're tools. The tools in Proverbs are accessible. They're in the best-selling book in the whole world, in reach of everybody. They leave them in hotels. Yet not everyone understands how to use tools. A power tool in the hands of an infant is dangerous, just as the proverb is in the mouth of a fool. Proverbs are tools that we must learn how to use correctly and teach our children how to understand correctly. So before we get too far, we're going to delineate a few terms. We talked about wisdom and knowledge a few weeks ago in our spiritual gift series. And I want to run over real quick what they are, as we'll be seeing these two terms a whole lot. And they're similar, but they're not the same. Number one, knowledge. Knowledge is information. Knowledge is facts and observation. Knowledge is held onto and stored for greater use, or for later use. Knowledge is the ground floor of wisdom, and true good knowledge only comes from the fear of the Lord, as we'll see. And number two, wisdom is first and foremost given by God. Wisdom is the gift to understand knowledge and act upon it in a proper manner. Wisdom has a purpose. Solomon's purpose for asking for wisdom was to govern God's people well. And wisdom notices patterns, correlations, and foresees outcomes. But in our state, it's not quite a promise. Knowledge is in your mind, and wisdom is acted out. Knowledge shows you. Apologize. Knowledge is in mind, and wisdom is acted out. Knowledge knows you have to get up at 6, and wisdom sets an alarm and goes to bed on time. Knowledge says the Sabbath is coming up, and wisdom cleans the house the day before. Knowledge knows that David committed adultery, and wisdom says we shouldn't pray that non-repentant adulteral rules over us. Knowledge sees a stop sign. Wisdom knows to check for cops before you roll through it. Or wisdom stops at the line and waits a little bit before going. Knowledge is internal, and wisdom is how it becomes external. And I'd like to think that understanding is being able to grasp knowledge so well that you can pass it on to someone else. Understanding is tangible knowledge. Understanding is a step up from knowledge and similar to wisdom. It can come from experience, and perhaps when you've done wisely, you notice the effects, and that's understanding. Or when you do unwisely and experience the ramifications, that is also understanding. And interestingly enough, the first time that Scripture, at least as far as I've seen, uses knowledge, wisdom, and understanding in the same verse, it's about a craftsman who built the tabernacle, blessed with these three and workmanship from the Lord. So if you're ever looking to bounce wisdom off of somebody, call a carpenter or a plumber or a skilled tradesman, and they can give you a hand. Now I want to point out that the use of the word here, simple, we're going to see the word simple over and over in this text. And I think it will be easy to conflate simple with foolish. Category we'll come across numerous times in Proverbs. Simple has a different meaning here, though. Simple doesn't always necessarily mean foolish. Simple is youthful, easy to entice towards good or evil. Simple is sometimes shown mercy and sometimes punishment. Simple is always given understanding and preservation when it's referred to in the book of Psalms. Yet simple seems to be neutral, leaning towards foolishness in Proverbs. The simple inherit folly, yet are not so entrenched in it that they can't forsake that inheritance for a greater one of better worth found in prudence. The foolish may see error in his ways, yet the foolish have dug themselves into a deep hole in pursuit of folly, near inescapable without a rope from above. The simple are still looking for a shovel to start there. That makes sense. The simple, left simple, loving their simplicity, will inherit punishment. And it is our joy as the wise to impart wisdom to them. The introduction continues, let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The wise hear these words and increase in learning. The one who understands these proverbs and saying will be given guidance enough to understand wiser words and tougher riddles. I like the word riddle here because often life is a riddle. There aren't plain answers for a lot of things in life, but wisdom from God in heaven will make your path straight and the riddles of life easier to solve. And the riddles or sayings of the wise become easier to decipher as you gain wisdom. For a proverb is not always readily apparent without peeling back some layers. So we see there are levels of wisdom. The wise become wiser and more understanding of life and her riddles, and they are guided by understanding. If you're like me, you acknowledge your inadequacy, remembering times of foolishness and folly, and wonder where the ground floor is to enter into wisdom. And luckily for you, if you're saved and fear Yahweh, you are in the building. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. There you go. That's the ground floor. Fear of the Lord. Fear the Lord and you begin your journey to knowledge. You're in the building and you're climbing the stairs, and as we go through this book, we'll climb the stairs together and become wiser, more godly people together. What is fearing the Lord? What does it look like? Are we to cower simply at the mention of his name? No. We're sons and daughters of the Most High, filled with boldness. We may tremble when we are in his presence, but not for terror, but in reverence and awe. I don't panic around my firearm, but if someone had it pointed at me, I would certainly dread that. In the same way a child loves and fears his father's rebuke, and so wishes to please him, so too we should fear the Lord. And if I were a dog, fearing the Lord would look like rolling on my back, exposing myself vulnerable to my master in submission. And yet, because we are humans, if he were an earthly king before us, we would bow down to him and pledge him our land, our wealth, and our lives. Fearing the Lord is submission to that which he says is good, even when we don't understand. For we know that a creature crossing a creator is far worse than not getting our way. Fearing the Lord is showing reverence, respect, and awe towards him. And fearing the Lord here is the beginning of any true, lasting knowledge. And that isn't to say that the world doesn't have knowledge, but it is to say that knowledge is out of place without a fear of God. Knowledge doesn't build anything lasting apart from God. The priority here, the beginning, it isn't the knowledge. The beginning is the submission to God, the fear of God. For even men have their own wisdom, but their wisdom would be found wanting when compared to even the foolishness of God, if he had any. This is to say, you can have knowledge apart from fear of the Lord. It just won't mean anything. It's like having a car without a license, or a leash without a dog, or a hammer without a nail. Knowledge will puff up if we do not know what knowledge exists to serve. The brother of our Lord wrote in James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. When you face trials of various kinds, you may ask God for the wisdom you lack. Ask in faith without doubting, for doubt will make your mind wishy-washy and make you double-minded. You'll be teetering on wisdom and folly. Those voices will get muddied up. The trials we face in life will no doubt give us wisdom from God before, during, or after, depending on when we ask earnestly. God will guide your paths. Sometimes the wisdom seems to come too late, when really the understanding we gained wasn't meant for us at the time, but for those who come after us. For those who come after, so long as they aren't fools, despising wisdom and instruction, will profit from our trials in faith and the wisdom bestowed upon us through those trials. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are graceful garland for your head and pendant for your neck. This is the end of the intro. We find the original recipient of the book, Solomon's son. And at times throughout the first 9 chapters, Solomon says, my son or my sons, speaking to sometimes singular, looking at one, and sometimes calling out the whole group. And I think there's 2 levels to this book and who it's for. There's the original recipient of this wisdom, Solomon's son, most likely Rehoboam. And then there is a scribe or collector of these proverbs who formed this into a book. I imagine that as Solomon spoke all these words to his son, the unnamed scribe gave these proverbs as a gift to his child. And it's really interesting because we're God-fearers, and no worthwhile understanding is truly of our own. But all wisdom comes from God. The source of Solomon's wisdom is the same as yours. I say that again. The source of Solomon's wisdom is the same source as yours. And in the way that Solomon bestows this wisdom on his children, we can bestow it upon ours today. Today, Solomon's wisdom belongs to us so long as we read with understanding, given from a place that fears the Lord. And this book is more than just applicable to you, but how you live it out will be applicable to your heirs. The point of this book is not to edify the writer, it's to equip the reader, the child, the youth who will hear it read aloud. And it's no different than how Passover is structured to make our kids ask questions about what occurred on this day, or how the Shema commands us to teach our children the commands of the Lord. We teach our children to equip them to honor God. And our faith and how we walk it out, it's not all about us. It's about training up disciples. And if you're parents, your disciples are forced to live with you for 18 years. We know our faith can't cover our children, but how we walk it out will certainly impact them. How we use the wisdom in this book will impact how long-lasting our godly legacies will be. Will your children sing songs of how you can stand with the mightiest in Scripture because you exercise restraint and wisdom in adversity? Or will you be forgotten by your descendants because nobility wasn't the factor in your life? If wisdom starts with a fear of the Lord and is freely given to those who ask for it in faith, surely we can be a wise people, far wiser than anyone in the world. And our children, should we teach it to them in faith, will be even wiser than us. As wisdom ought to compound in our lives over time, so it will be with our children fourfold if we give it to them at half the age we had it. One of the first lessons that he gives here is beautiful. It's a head start for your children. It says, hear your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. And parents, this is no condemnation on you for anything in your life that may have made it impossible to raise your children with your spouse or former spouse. But your children will have a head start if both parents are in the home. And parents, this is an encouragement. Stay together when things are tough, when at all reasonably possible. For your heirs will be better off for it. Single parents, this is encouragement to acknowledge that your children will be blessed by your wisdom, but you're going to have to work twice as hard to have righteous men and women in your children's life to impart the wisdom that you may lack from the opposite sex. A child receiving wisdom from only one parent might sometimes have a harder time understanding a concept if the understanding isn't there from the proper parent. And not having both parents in the house doesn't spell out doom for your children. I came from a home where my biological father wasn't there. Fortunately, my mother knew that I was at a disadvantage. So she structured her life in a way that I would receive more time and wisdom from father figures, such as my grandfather, uncles, and family friends who could offer what she couldn't until she found a godly man to marry, my father. So single parents, you can take encouragement from them, that you know where you and your children are at, that you are in a room surrounded by people who would love to come alongside you and pour godly wisdom. We're all here for you. Another thing this is, it's not to say that you will automatically pass down wisdom. Parents aren't going to pass down wisdom automatically. If a parent is unwise, they will train their children up in folly. This should motivate the young and unmarried people in this room to choose their spouses all the wiser with prayerful consideration on how they'd like their children to be raised. For as it takes two parents, or in today's society, I would say it takes a mother and a father to create a child, it takes a mother and a father to fully raise a child in the way God intends. So to adorn them with all the treasures they should have as they get older. The instruction of a father and teaching of a mother are graceful garland upon their heads and pendants for their necks. Our children wear fine jewelry, often obtained at our great expense when they listen to their parents' wisdom. Wisdom is better than crowns or fine jewelry, for you will not have to make as many fake friends with wisdom as you do with money. And wisdom can be given more freely and multiplied in ways that diamonds and gold can't. So, as we continue, I've broken this chapter into 3 sections. Just finished the introduction, which includes the who's of this book and the purpose of this book. And the next section we'll be going into is about the sinners who would entice you. Then we'll finish up with the last section called Wisdom's Call. Solomon advises his son, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. See, the sinners will have words of trickery and bribery dripping with blood. It may not be your blood today, but no doubt it eventually will be. The sinner will always try to entice, but the wise will turn from them. Notice it says, do not consent, or do not be willing. It's like James wrote, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. All you have to do is resist. You just say, I don't consent. Never let anyone knowingly lump you in with the wicked, because the wicked are the loudest, yappiest chihuahuas. They cannot force you to do anything according to their will, and they will try to convince you, perhaps, that you have no other options but to fall in with them. Those who fear the Lord know not to fall for their bargain. Before long, the wicked's counsel will turn to violence. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious, we shall fill our houses with plunder. The sinners are going to entice you with promises of victory and camaraderie and riches. They'll say, if you do this immoral thing to advance your career, people will owe you favors. You'll get that promotion. If you fib here, you can get your way on this certain, and no one will think any less of you. No one will know. The wicked throw the innocent under the bus. They're robbers from the Good Samaritan. They're the robbers from the Good Samaritan parable, waiting to steal and shed blood. And the wicked shed blood to advance any of their motives, which sounds like most of the political parties that we shouldn't be in bed with. The sinner will dangle goods and fancy living in front of you, but we know that the instruction of our parents is true riches. So we must listen to wise counsel before we listen to crooked counsel. Throw in your lot among us, and we will have one purse. The wicked promise equity. And equity is fine. Proverbs talks about equity. Solomon says, hey, I'm trying to teach you equity. Equity is fine so long as it is a godly equity. But the wicked promise a level playing field between them all and an evenness between the thieves. The problem is that there is a little chance of honesty from a thief. When you throw your lot in with the sinners and share a bank account with them, the only thing you're likely to share in the end is punishment. And I'm not a huge fan I'm not a huge reader of extra biblical texts and Enoch and all that, just because I don't understand the Bible half as well as I should. I focus there. But I've looked through some of them, and this verse reminds me of Enoch 6. The angels that were on the earth in the very beginning saw the human women, and they thought that they were beautiful and wanted to procreate with them. The leader of the rebellious angels feared that he would be alone in his rebellion and suffer a great penalty for his sin. And so he made a pact with 199 other angels to take wives, produce offspring with them, so that not only one of them would be punished harshly. And of course, things did not work out as they had planned. Jude says they were imprisoned in darkness with chains and are still awaiting judgment day. And so I always joke with my friends as I leave, be good or don't get caught. And I always think, but you'll always get caught. Sinners forget that. They think, be good or don't get caught, but they always get caught. And that's what we get when we make pacts with the sinner. We get caught and we get punished. And as we finish the quote from the sinner's enticement, Solomon responds to the quote. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird. But these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessor. He's saying, sons, children, don't walk in the way that the sinners walk. It's like Psalm 1, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits at the feet of scoffers. The wicked make plans to shed blood. They make haste to do evil, but all their plans are truly fruitless. And the heathen nations may plot in vain, but the Lord's Son will break them with a rod of iron. They spread out their nets, waiting to devour anyone who walks past, not realizing that the strong man will eventually come and overpower them. In verse 19, it gets to the crux of this matter and why he is telling his son all of this. He cares for his child. Solomon knows that those who have an unquenchable greed will do anything to satisfy their unrighteous desires, and they'll ensnare themselves. Resist the temptations of such men. They will drag you down into the pit with them, and their covetousness is their downfall. Greedy people are gluttons for what seems desirable and sweet to them, and so they suck on candy-coated razor blades. They enjoy their sweets until they die. Solomon then contrasts the sinner and their drawing in with the declarations of Lady Wisdom. Wisdom cries loud in the street. In the markets, she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out, and at the entrance of the city gates, she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? Wisdom is personified here as a woman, crying out aloud in the crowded marketplace. We're going to cover why wisdom is depicted as a woman in a future lesson. But for today, I want to focus on seeing that wisdom is accessible. You just have to listen for her, which is the hardest part. You can hear the voice calling out, but it's among so many others. Generally, it's the voice telling you to do the right thing. She is there, yet she is mostly overlooked. So here's something you don't want to miss. In this public place, she isn't calling out to her friends or family. She isn't calling out to her disciples. Wisdom is crying out against the simple and the scoffers. Wisdom may as well be crying out at the sinner who loves ill-gotten gain from the last section we just read. And this wisdom, she might sound harsh. She may sound angry or accusatory or condemning, and that is the nature of wisdom. There are moral absolutes, and there is a right and a wrong and even seemingly neutral areas of our lives. There is a more correct way to do something as neutral seeming as putting your dishes in the sink. There is a more correct way to tell your husband to rinse the dishes off when he puts them in the sink without doing it. And thankfully, my wife is full of wisdom and winsomeness and reminds me with kindness and not nagging. She's wise. The seemingly neutral things in our lives aren't entirely neutral. They might not be sin or not sin, but there is certainly wise and unwise. Wisdom can be a great friend or a dangerous enemy. Unfortunately, most people love being simple. And the simple won't be able to say, I didn't know, because she was there calling out all along, offering herself to the simple, should they only listen. Verse 23, if you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour my spirit out to you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof. We listen for wisdom's call and take our first steps in knowledge by fearing the Lord. Wisdom will pour out its spirit upon you. Wisdom wants you to take hold of it and have more. Wisdom wants to make each of us as King Solomon with wisdom and understanding in abundance. There will unfortunately be punishment for those who do not turn away from their simplicity in time. And as long as we ignore wisdom, we will face earthly consequences. That includes Christians. When I do something foolish, I better expect consequences. I better pray to God for wisdom on how to fix what I have made a mess of. Wisdom says, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes up like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. And this is awesome. My favorite part, I think. Wisdom has a license to laugh and mock at those who are fools. Mockers are bad, we know that. And so wisdom is not a mocker herself. But she will mock those who shrugged her off. And she's allowed to do that because she's innocent in the matter. She says, look, I've been in the market every day for years, and I've been warning you to turn from trusting in yourself. I've been asking you to humble yourself, humble your heart, and learn from me. Look what you've gotten yourself into. I told you this would happen, and now it did. Wisdom is lovely, and it is spiritual to the godly, but it is antagonistic to the fool. Truth stirs people up to hate her, for she is beautiful, and people are jealous when they can't have their own version of truth. Wisdom can be relieved at her enemy's downfall. It proves wisdom to be. One more time. Wisdom can be relieved at her enemy's downfall because it proves her to be true. The downfall of the fools show the simple that her claims are true. And it might save more than the one who perishes. And I believe on Judgment Day, we're not going to feel sorry for those who did not listen to the gospel. When calamity comes, we'll be a part of it. We will end up mocking those who spit on the Lord and hate him. That's motivation today to be like wisdom calling out in the streets. Hey, turn from your simple ways. How long are you going to love being simple and sinful? There's something better. Then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof. When it's too late, it's too late. Wisdom can ease the aftermath of mistakes, but it can't help undo the past. And when our final breath has been exhaled, wisdom will be of no help. The dead may seek wisdom, but they will not find her. And we get back to the heart of wisdom. It says it here, they did not choose the fear of the Lord. A choice that every man is capable of making, but many are too complacent to make. They believed in their own devices, their own science, their own philosophy, their own moralism, and origins, and comfortability, and sensualities, and equity, and justice, and nonsense. The end of godless knowledge leaves the fools proclaiming in their heart, I don't fear God, for there is no God. The fool builds his house on false premises and weak foundation, waiting to be washed away by the next storm. When you don't fear the Lord and wisdom won't have you, you'll jump through just about any hoop to make sense of this world, so long as God isn't present in that world. You may appear knowledgeable to your peers, but in reality you hate knowledge if you despise wisdom's reproof. Therefore, they shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure, will be at ease, without dread of disaster. Just like the sinner who lies in wait for their own blood, so do the simple, and the fools eat the fruit of their own devices. They turn, or even worse, they dig their heels in. So church family, we need to sit at the feet of wisdom with humble hearts, willing to be taught and acknowledge that our simple ways were wrong. Wisdom isn't popular. And while it is among the crowds, it's not followed by them. Wisdom rewards those who listen, security and ease. So the big idea today, fear God if you want knowledge. Fear God by acknowledging that you're sinful, repenting or turning from that sin, and trusting that Jesus Christ and his sacrifice are enough to cleanse you of all sin and impurity. Faith in God through Jesus, the only way to gain true knowledge. And that faith will obey Jesus, everything he said. He said more than just the red letter. Ask God for wisdom when you need it, because you will need it. Don't ask without expecting an answer, and don't ask with your mind already made up. Really seek God's wisdom with a single mind, not doubting anything. And remember that this book of wisdom, it's not only for your benefit, it's not only for my benefit. It's to benefit our children. If you live out these principles that we'll be going over in this book, the odds are good that your children will. If you speak words of wisdom and do deeds of righteousness with your children in tow, they will see it and they will be blessed by the examples you are leaving them. The decisions you make today will affect your great grandchildren. And we'll see that as we study King Solomon. And I'd love if you would humor me. I've been reading a lot lately, and I've enjoyed how in the past people sang songs to remember things, and events, and ideas and people. Solomon wrote 1,005 songs about any number of subjects, and some are preserved even today. I'd like to sing a simple song about the Proverbs, if you'd have it. You can join along too if you want to. It's a simple tune. Take a drink of water. And the reason for this is I want it stuck in our heads that we know, we can remember every day. Why am I doing these things I do? Why? I want my children to be wise. I have it on the screen. Maybe. I'll sing the verse first. If you guys want to jump in, I'm going to sing the first verse twice. I think that'd be fun. What can I leave my son when I have turned to stone? What shall he take with him when he has left my home? The prodigal had pots of gold and lost all that he owned. What can I leave my son that he can always hold? You guys would like to join in? I'll sing that again, and we got a few verses. What can I leave my son when I have turned to stone? What shall he take with him when he has left my home? The prodigal had pots of gold and lost all that he owned. What can I leave my son that he can always hold? What will I give my heir when I have gone to sleep? What can I give to him to hold him back from deep? If wisdom shall he make his bride, he'll sow less than he reaps. What can I give my heir that he can always keep? What will my children have when I have long been dead? A pocket watch, a jar of ash, some tools left in the shed. The wisdom of his parents placed a garland on his head. I pray he holds on all the words that I have rightly said. It's a work in progress, but it gets the point. Our wisdom will belong to our children and it will bless them. And we'll either be aligned with the sinner who entices the simple towards folly and bloodshed, or we'll be on soapboxes with Lady Wisdom, calling out for all to hear. How we multiply by our own children and disciples will be a lasting legacy that testifies that the Lord is good. We will speak to our children that glorious things are spoken of him, for he is good and he is the author of all knowledge. Let's pray.